It began with a sentence that crossed oceans and crashed like thunder in the heart of Ouagadougou. Vice President Kamala Harris didn't think twice when she said it. Standing at a press podium in Washington, eyes sharp, tone cold, she let the words fall with surgical precision. He's just a soldier, pretending to be a politician. And just like that, the second highest official in the most powerful country on earth had dismissed the president of Burkina Faso, not with diplomacy, but with a backhanded insult. Half a world away, the morning sun was just beginning to climb over the cracked rooftops and dusty roads of Ouagadougou. Inside the presidential compound, a phone rang once, twice, then a third time. President Ibrahim Traoré sat up in bed. His heart wasn't racing from the heat, but from the voice on the other end of the line. It was Michael Kabor, his most trusted advisor, and he didn't sound calm. "Mr. President," Michael said breathlessly, "you need to see this. Now." Ibrahim swung his feet to the floor and walked slowly to the tall window. The city below was just waking up. Chickens stirred in alleyways. The air was still. "What did she say?" he asked, his voice low. Michael didn't soften the blow. "She called you a dictator, questioned your intelligence, said, and I quote, 'You're just a soldier playing politics.'" Ibrahim stood still. The light hit the side of his face. His jaw tightened slow, deliberate. He had been insulted before, by exiled ministers, by foreign reporters, by voices that still clung to the past. But this was different. This came from the very center of global power. It wasn't just about him. It was about what he stood for. A young African leader, a son of revolution, a man who rose not through privilege, but through fire. He wasn't just being mocked. He was being erased. Outside, the streets of Ouagadougou began to hum with the rhythm of morning life, motorcycles buzzing, vendors opening stalls. But inside the palace, the air had shifted. It was no longer just warm. It was electric. Ibrahim stood in the center of his cabinet room. High ceilings, long mahogany table, curtains pulled wide open. His top ministers were already there, expressions tight. He didn't yell. He didn't pace. He simply said, "We will not answer with anger. We'll answer with proof, with record, with truth." And in that moment, something unspoken changed. This was no longer about a headline. It was about history. The insult was personal, but the response would be global. The room was quiet, but something fierce was building. President Ibrahim Traoré stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled up, eyes locked on the faces of his ministers. Around him, the atmosphere felt thick, not with fear, but with purpose. The insult from Washington still echoed. But here, in this chamber, it was being reshaped into resolve. "We don't strike back," he said, voice calm but firm. "We reveal. We show them who we are, not through noise, through record." The first to move was Lauren Sawado, Minister of Economy. Her fingers danced across her laptop, scrolling through rows of hard-earned numbers. "Mr. President," she said, her voice steady. "Since 2022, we've lifted 23% of our population out of extreme poverty. GDP rose 7.2%, last year highest in the Sahel. Foreign investment has surged. Inflation is stabilized. Our currency is holding strong. Ibrahim nodded once, not surprised, but focused. Then came Dr. Eugen Powell, Minister of Education, quiet, reserved. A man whose memory could hold 10 years of data like poetry. We've built 847 new schools. Literacy among girls is up 29%. Access to education is expanding in all 13 regions. He leaned forward, almost whispering. Children are learning to read. Mr. President. Some, for the first time in their family's history. A third minister spoke. Healthcare. Maternal mortality down by a third. Infant mortality down 31%. 4 million new citizens now reached by rural clinics. The numbers kept coming. And with them, something deeper, a heartbeat. Because to Ibrahim, these weren't statistics. They were stories. Faces. He saw the girl in the north, who no longer walked 5 miles to school. The mother, who didn't have to give birth alone. The farmer who crossed a new bridge and finally reached a market. Each number was proof, not just of progress, but of dignity. He turned back to his ministers. The light through the window hit his shoulder like a spotlight. He didn't flinch. Prepare everything, he said. Graphs, certificates, photos. I want the world to see their reflection in us. I want our people to feel seen. This wasn't about ego. This was about narrative. He was going to respond, not with fury, not with finger-pointing, but with evidence carved from the soil of his country. Across the table, Michael Kabor met his gaze. You're not just defending yourself anymore, he said quietly. You're defending all of us. Ibrahim didn't answer. He didn't have to, because in that moment, everyone in the room understood the world wasn't ready for what was coming, but it would have no choice but to listen. The storm didn't hit all at once. It started like a tremor, a headline here, a breaking news chyron there. But by noon, the tremor had become a reckoning. In Washington, Vice President Kamala Harris sat in her private office, watching her own words play back on screen. Cold, dismissive, stripped of diplomacy. Just a soldier pretending to be a politician. Now, those words were everywhere, and they weren't landing the way she expected. CNN's Africa Bureau called it an unprovoked jab. The BBC reported backlash from multiple African governments, including Ghana and Senegal. A South African newspaper simply headlined, "Dignity Mocked." Kamala leaned back in her leather chair. Eyes dark, jaw tight, around hair. Aides scrambled with damage control memos. But she already knew. They're going to hit back, she muttered under her breath. And they were. Because halfway across the world, in the courtyard of the presidential palace in Ouagadougou, the air pulsed with movement. Cameras were being mounted, screens tested. A quiet, almost reverent tension buzzed through the halls. This wasn't a press event. This was a declaration in the making. Ibrahim walked the corridor, flanked by aides. He passed the framed portraits of Thomas Sankara and Nelson Mandela. And for a moment, he paused. The faces looked out at him, frozen in time, but somehow alive, watching, waiting. Michael Kabor caught up to him, breath short, phone in hand. "Sir," he said. "It's happening. Nairobi, Johannesburg, Dar es Salaam. They're all responding. Social media is on fire. Editors, former presidents, students, Puts. It's not just support. It's momentum. Ibrahim stopped mid-step. We must stay focused. He said softly, this cannot become about ego. It has to be about dignity. Then he added, quieter still. Every word I say will not be for me. It'll be for the boy in a village who thinks the world forgot him. In a small adjoining room, technicians adjusted microphones, tightened cables, calibrated screens. There were no teleprompters, just truth, and the weight of being heard. The world was watching, but it wasn't just foreign eyes that mattered. It was the people of Burkina Faso, men and women, who had waited decades for a leader who wouldn't hide, who wouldn't apologize for their story. Outside, radios crackled in marketplaces, phones buzzed in classrooms. Villagers gathered around TVs in silence, waiting not for entertainment, but for vindication. Because something had shifted. What started as a careless insult had become a spark. And in Ouagadougou, under the rising Sahel sun, that spark was about to become a fire the world couldn't ignore. At 2:00 p.m. sharp, the doors swung open, and for the first time, the world saw him not as a headline, not as a hashtag, but as a man stepping into his moment. President Ibrahim Traoré walked forward in silence. No medals, no flags behind him, just a navy blue suit, clean lines, and the weight of a continent on his shoulders. The room was packed. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, NHK, over 100 global outlets. Millions more watched from screens across the world. He stopped at the podium. No notes in hand. No teleprompter glow. Just him. Then he spoke. Good afternoon. He said, today, I do not speak merely as the president of Burkina Faso. I speak as a son of Africa, as a man who refuses to let dignity be trampled by arrogance. A hush fell over the room. Last week, he continued, I was called a dictator, a soldier pretending to be a politician. These words were not just aimed at me. They were aimed at every man, woman, and child who cast a ballot under the Sahel sun. He gestured. A screen lit up behind him. 3 national elections. Supervised. Verified. Turnout, 89% higher than most Western democracies. There was no spin. Just numbers. Just truth. They say I do not understand democracy. He said, voice unwavering. But democracy is not a Harvard accent. It is not a suit behind a podium in Washington. It is building trust, showing up, delivering results. Another slide. Bar graphs. Real change. Infant mortality, down 31%. 847. Schools built. Healthcare access expanded by 340%. 6 million people now receiving clean water. He paused, letting the silence breathe. These aren't statistics, he said. They are mothers who survived childbirth, children learning to write their names, farmers no longer walking 10 kilometers just for water. The room remained frozen. Then came the part no one expected. They said I'm just a soldier playing dress-up. He didn't flinch. I will not defend my pride. I will show my record. The screen changed again. Diplomas. Certificates. Seals. Bachelors in military science. Masters in public administration. MBA in economic development. He looked directly at the camera. Leadership isn't a performance. It's preparation. No one blinked. Even the shutters from the cameras slowed. Then came the final blow, delivered not with rage, but with steel-edged calm. We are not perfect, but we are not puppets, and we will not be lectured by those who mistake dominance for diplomacy. The room cracked. Applause burst forward. Hesitant, but growing. It wasn't noise. It was recognition. And for the first time, the world wasn't laughing. It was listening. She didn't blink during the speech. Not once, while much of the world stood stunned, inspired, or enraged. Ambassador Victoria Langston watched President Traoré's broadcast from a quiet room overlooking the East River. The applause, the praise, the numbers, none of it shook her. She wasn't here for applause. She was here for control. For years, Langston had operated in silence, never chasing headlines, only managing them. A master of corridors, not cameras. She didn't shout. She aligned. And when the world leaned toward someone she hadn't vetted, she moved silently, but with precision. By nightfall, she had written the memo. It wasn't addressed to the public. It didn't bear emotional language. It was sent privately to a dozen Western ambassadors, allies, traditionalists, keepers of a global order. The message was clear. Burkina Faso is not what it appears. Its recent global momentum is manufactured through targeted media coordination and rhetoric designed to stir anti-Western sentiment. It recommended a pause on development deals, a re-evaluation of support, and more dangerously, it advised delaying Burkina Faso's invitation to the upcoming UN General Assembly under the guise of regional stability. Langston didn't see it as sabotage. She saw it as maintenance. But something cracked. Inside her own office, Junior Staffayang, idealistic, tired of shadows, read the memo and froze. He knew what this was. He knew what it meant. And so, without asking anyone's permission, he sent it to a journalist in Geneva, one who didn't belong to the usual press circles, one who listened. By morning, the headline hit like a bomb. Leaked memo reveals U.S. attempt to silence Traoré in Nairobi. People gathered around street screens. In Accra, university campuses buzzed with fury. In Johannesburg, radio hosts read the memo line by line, their voices shaking with indignation. They couldn't challenge the truth. One student said, so they tried to bury it. Langston's office issued a cold, three-sentence denial. The memo has been mischaracterized. The United States remains committed to inclusive dialogue. But it was too late. The veil had been lifted. The world wasn't outraged because of one document. It was outraged because the document proved something deeper. Fear. Fear of a voice that didn't ask for permission. Fear of a leader who didn't flinch. Back in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim read the memo quietly. Around him, the room stood still. They're not afraid of me, he said. They're afraid of what happens if the world listens. And this time the world wasn't just listening. It was watching. The chamber was still. Gold walls, marble floors, translation headsets, humming like distant whispers. Delegates from 193 nations sat in a crescent of polished power, eyes fixed on the stage. But this wasn't a ceremony. It was a reckoning. And at the center, President Ibrahim Traoré. He walked to the podium alone. No entourage. No papers in hand. Only a few folded notes. The hall had seen thousands of speeches, none like this. He began slowly. His voice calm, clear, deliberate. I come here today, not as a man seeking favor, not as a leader asking for applause. I come as a representative of people whose voices have been edited out of history. A murmur rolled through the room. He spoke of aid repackaged as control, of trade dressed as generosity, of dignity lost in the fine print of diplomacy. Then he paused. But today, something must be brought into the light. A screen lowered behind him, and there it was stamped, dated, sealed. The leaked memo from the U.S. Mission to the United Nations, signed by Ambassador Victoria Langston. A private call to allies delay funding. Suspend cooperation. Silence. The voice rising out of Africa. A gasp rippled through the chamber. Even the American delegation flinched. This, he said softly, is not fiction. It was verified this morning by legal teams in Switzerland, South Africa, and Canada. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point fingers. I will not use this stage to humiliate anyone, he said. Ambassador Langston did not act alone. She is a symptom of a system that believes Africa should stay quiet in rooms we're not invited to, and not meant to understand. The room sat frozen, but emotionally it roared. Then, he stepped closer to the microphone. Voice low but ringing. We do not ask for pity. We ask for respect. Not as a threat. Not as a burden. But as equals. He turned to the camera, speaking not just to the chamber, but to every screen around the globe. If a memo can be written in secret to silence us, then let this moment be our louder answer. He looked directly at the American delegation. With truth, there is no need to shout. With dignity, there is no need to kneel. Silence. A beat. Then another. And suddenly applause. First from Ghana. Then South Africa. Then Brazil. France. Indonesia. Even a few hesitant hands from traditional U.S. allies joined in. By the time he stepped down, half the chamber was on its feet. He hadn't come to win. He came to reveal, and in doing so, he didn't just defend his country. He changed the rules. The world didn't breathe for 24 hours. After Ibrahim, Traoré stepped down from that UN podium. Headlines didn't just report, they erupted. Newsrooms scrambled. Commentators flipped scripts. Even late-night talk shows, often indifferent to African politics, paused the jokes. A man walked into the lion's den. One anchor said, and walked out holding the microphone. But in Washington, the mood was different. Behind closed doors at the State Department, pressure built like a sealed kettle. This wasn't just a PR failure. It was a rupture. Victoria Langston, the once untouchable architect of quiet control, had become a liability. She didn't speak to press. She didn't call in favors. She just disappeared. A single press release confirmed it. Ambassador Langston has chosen to step away from her post. No apology. No ceremony. Just silence. But the silence said everything. Inside the White House, Kamala Harris sat alone, eyes hollow, screen glowing. Ibrahim's speech played again and again. The truth wasn't in his tone. It was in the mirror he held up. And now, she had to answer to it. Her staff urged caution. Don't fly. Don't speak. Let it pass. She didn't listen. 2 days later. Air Force, 2 touchdown in Ouagadougou. No red carpet. No motorcade. Just heat. Dust. And a quiet crowd at the edge of the runway. Ibrahim Traoré stood waiting. Their handshake was brief, firm, and captured on cameras around the world. In the joint press conference that followed, Kamala Harris did what few expected. She stepped back. Without retreating, "I came here not to defend my words," she said, "but to learn from them." She turned toward Ibrahim. "We had a long, honest conversation. I respect his leadership, and I deeply regret the tone and implications of what I said. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't deflection either." Ibrahim's response was calm, steady. "Today is not about who was wrong yesterday. It's about who is ready to move forward together with honesty, not hierarchy." The room stilled, and outside the palace walls, something began to shift. The narrative wasn't just bending. It was evolving. From tension to truth. From insult to instruction. Within weeks, 15 nations signed cooperative agreements with Burkina Faso, not out of sympathy, but out of respect. China pledged billions. Germany offered clean energy investment. Canada launched a maternal health initiative. But Ibrahim never called it victory. To him, it was weight. A new responsibility. Respect is not applause. He told his cabinet, "It's pressure. It's expectation. And we must meet it." He wasn't leading for headlines. He was leading for history. The sun was setting over Ouagadougou. Not with spectacle, but with quiet grace, the kind of light that makes even concrete glow. The palace courtyard was still. No cameras. No podiums. Just wind, dust, and silence. And a man walking slowly through a garden. Ibrahim Traoré held his daughter's hand as she skipped beside him, her small sandals tapping softly on the stone path. Her braids bouncing with every question she hadn't yet asked. He had spoken before nations. He had exposed secrets, shifted global narratives. But here, under the hibiscus trees, he was just a father. She looked up at him, eyes wide, full of wonder, and asked, "Daddy, did you change the world?" He paused. The question was simple. The answer wasn't. He turned toward the horizon, where the city lights began to blink alive, the same streets where protests once raged, where students now read his words aloud in classrooms, where the insult that started it all had been turned into something unbreakable. He knelt beside her, eye to eye. "No, my dear," he said, voice soft but certain. "I didn't change the world. I defended our dignity." She blinked. Unsure. He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. The world changed because it finally listened. Elsewhere, in cities far from this garden, change had already begun to ripple. 3 international universities broke ground, focused not on creating elites, but on producing leaders who could serve. Investment surged not because Burkina Faso begged, but because it stood tall. Foreign aid became partnership. Agreements were now written in mutual terms. Even old skeptics had gone quiet. But Ibrahim didn't seek applause. He declined interviews, turned down invitations, let others speak. When he did appear often in town halls or untelevised visits to rural clinics, he said the same thing: "This was never about me." And people believed him because he never made it about himself. In cafes and classrooms, children recited his words with truth. There is no need to shout. With dignity. There is no need to kneel. And in embassies across the world, diplomats, even those who once dismissed him, now studied him. They studied the moment when a man chose humility over rage, data over drama, and in doing so, reminded the world that leadership is not loud. It is clear. It is quiet. It is unwavering. Back in the garden, his daughter pulled gently at his hand. "Come on, Daddy," she said. "It's getting dark." He rose, nodded, and walked on the stars beginning to appear above them, like witnesses to something bigger than power, something called truth. And once truth is spoken with dignity, it cannot be silenced.